My life in the suburbs was seemingly perfect to anyone looking in. A big house with a sprawling backyard, a pristine pool that sparkled under the sun, a hard-working husband, and a 20-year-old son about to graduate from college. But behind those closed doors, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. My husband, Mike, spent most of his time at work, and when he was home he was glued to his phone or the TV. The warmth we once shared had faded over the years, leaving me feeling invisible in my own marriage. It was a Saturday afternoon in early summer when I first noticed Marcus. He was my son Eric's best friend, a polite and confident young man who had been coming over for months. I had never paid him much attention before, but that day something changed. Eric had invited Marcus to swim in our backyard pool. From the kitchen, I saw him through the sliding glass door. Marcus stood at the pool's edge, his body glistening with water under the midday sun. His athletic frame was lean but muscular, his dark skin flawless and smooth. He dove effortlessly into the water and resurfaced with a grin that showcased perfect white teeth. For a moment I couldn't look away. It wasn't just his looks that caught my attention. It was his confidence, the way he carried himself, so different from my husband's distant and tired demeanor. I felt a strange stirring inside me, one I hadn't felt in years. I brushed off the feeling and turned back to the dishes, but my mind kept drifting back to him. Over the next few weeks, Marcus began spending more time at our house. He and Eric worked out together in the garage, played video games late into the night, and sometimes just lounged by the pool. Each time Marcus was around, I found myself hyper-aware of his presence. One afternoon, while Eric had run to the store, Marcus came inside for a drink. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner. "Mrs. Blake, do you mind if I grab some water?" he asked, his deep voice startling me. "Of course, Marcus," I replied, trying to keep my tone casual. "And please call me Amanda." He flashed that charming smile again. "Thanks, Amanda." As he reached for a glass, our hands accidentally brushed. It was a small, fleeting moment, but a jolt ran through me. I quickly pulled my hand back, hoping he hadn't noticed how my breath hitched. "Sorry about that," he said with a small chuckle. "It's fine," I murmured, my cheeks flushing. After he left the kitchen, I leaned against the counter, trying to calm the racing thoughts in my head. What was happening to me? I was a married woman in my 40s, yet here I was blushing like a teenager over a boy half my age. That night, I sat by the pool after everyone had gone to bed. The water shimmered under the moonlight, its gentle ripples mirroring the unrest in my heart. I couldn't deny it anymore. There was something about Marcus that drew me in, something I couldn't explain or control. I told myself it was just a harmless crush, something that would fade with time. But deep down I knew better. The way he looked at me earlier that day, it wasn't just in my head. There was something unspoken between us, a spark that couldn't be ignored. As the night wore on, I resolved to push these feelings aside. I was a wife, a mother, and I had a family to protect. But even as I made that promise to myself, I couldn't help but wonder, what if? I tried to ignore my feelings, to bury them under the routine of my daily life. But Marcus made it impossible. His presence filled every corner of my home, his laughter echoing through the walls, his scent lingering in the air long after he'd left a room. A week after that night by the pool, everything changed. Eric and Marcus were playing basketball in the driveway, their shirts tossed aside in the summer heat. I had opened the living room window to let in some air, and their playful banter drifted inside. I tried to focus on folding laundry, but my eyes kept drifting to Marcus. When they finished playing, Eric ran inside to grab something from his room, leaving Marcus alone on the porch with a bottle of water. He caught me watching him through the window and smiled. It wasn't just a friendly smile. It was knowing like he could see right through me. My heart raced and I quickly looked away, pretending to busy myself with the laundry. "Nice day, isn't it?" Marcus's voice startled me. He was standing just outside the window now, leaning casually against the frame. "Yes, it is," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "You should come outside more, Mrs. Blake. Get some sun," he said, his tone light but laced with something I couldn't quite place. "I'm fine right here, but thank you," I said, forcing a smile before turning away. But his words lingered. It wasn't just the suggestion, it was the way he said it, like he was challenging me. Later that evening, I found myself alone in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner. Marcus walked in, his footsteps soft on the tile. "Need any help?" he asked, his voice low and smooth. No, I've got it, I replied, avoiding his gaze. But he didn't leave. Instead, he leaned against the counter, watching me. You work too hard, you know that? I paused, the plate in my hand forgotten. No one had said anything like that to me in years. It's just what I do, I said with a small shrug. Well, maybe someone should take care of you for a change, he said, his eyes locking with mine. My breath caught. There it was again, that spark, that unspoken tension between us. I knew I should walk away, say something to end this, but I couldn't. I was frozen, caught in his gaze like a moth to a flame. Before I could respond, Eric came into the room, breaking the moment. Marcus straightened up, his easy smile returning. Thanks for dinner, Mrs. Blake, he said before walking out with Eric. But his words hung in the air, heavier than I wanted to admit. The next few days were a blur of stolen glances and fleeting touches. Once in the kitchen, our hands brushed again, and this time, neither of us pulled away immediately. Another time, while walking past him in the hallway, his arm grazed mine, sending a shiver down my spine. I knew this was dangerous. I was walking a fine line, and one wrong step could destroy everything. But the more I tried to pull away, the more impossible it became. I tried to resist, but the more I did, the more I found myself drawn to him. One afternoon, while Eric was out running errands, Marcus stayed home. I was sitting on the patio sipping iced tea when he joined me. Mind if I sit? He asked. Of course not, I replied, trying to sound casual. For a while we sat in silence, the only sounds being the birds chirping and the distant hum of traffic. Then he turned to me. You seem different lately. Is everything okay? I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. I just have a lot on my mind, I finally said. If there's anything I can do to help. His voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. I looked at him, really looked at him, and in that moment something shifted. It was no longer just attraction. It was longing, a need to feel alive again. Sometimes a single decision can change everything. Will Amanda give in to her desires, or will she step back before crossing the line? Like and subscribe to follow this intense story of passion and betrayal. The moment I gave in was inevitable, though I had spent weeks convincing myself otherwise. It was a hot, stifling Friday night. Mike and Eric had gone to a baseball game in the city, and the house was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that lets your mind wander into dangerous territories. Marcus stayed home that night, saying he wasn't a fan of baseball. I didn't question it. Part of me was relieved he stayed. Part of me was terrified. I was sitting on the couch with a book in my hand, though I couldn't focus on a single page. Marcus appeared at the doorway, his tall silhouette outlined against the dim hallway light. Can I join you? He asked, holding a glass of water. Of course, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He sat beside me, closer than he ever had before. The air between us was charged, electrified by the tension we had been avoiding for weeks. You seem nervous, he said after a moment, his voice soft. I'm fine, I lied, though my hands trembled slightly as I turned the page. He reached out and gently took the book from me, setting it down on the coffee table. Amanda, you don't have to pretend with me. Hearing my name from his lips like that, no formalities, no pretense, sent a shiver down my spine. I turned to him, my resolve crumbling under the weight of his gaze. I can't, I started to say, but the words caught in my throat. Yes, you can, he replied, his voice firm, certain. I know you feel it too. And in that moment I stopped thinking. I stopped worrying about right or wrong, about the consequences waiting ahead. I leaned toward him and he met me halfway. When our lips touched, it was as if floodgates had burst open. Weeks of suppressed desire surged to the surface, consuming us both. His hands were strong but gentle as they framed my face, pulling me closer. I melted into him, forgetting everything except the way he made me feel. The hours that followed were a whirlwind of passion and guilt. We moved from the couch to the bedroom, where I had spent so many lonely nights wondering if my husband even noticed me anymore. Now someone did. But as the night stretched on, reality began creeping back in. I lay next to Marcus, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. This can't happen again, I said quietly, though even I didn't believe my own words. I don't think you mean that, Marcus replied, his voice calm and assured. I turned to him, searching his face for any sign of doubt or hesitation. There was none. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face. You deserve to feel this way, Amanda. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise. His words were a balm to my wounded heart, but they couldn't erase the guilt that had already taken root inside me. In the weeks that followed, our secret continued. We stole moments whenever we could, when Eric was out, when Mike worked late. The thrill of sneaking around only heightened the intensity, but it also made me paranoid. One afternoon, while we were together on the patio, Marcus took my hand. I quickly pulled away, glancing nervously toward the house. "Relax," he said with a crooked smile. "No one's home." "That's not the point," I whispered, my eyes darting toward the windows. But it wasn't just the fear of being caught that was eating away at me. Every time we were together, I felt myself slipping further and further from the person I used to be. The first crack in our secret appeared one night when Mike found Marcus's sweatshirt draped over the dining chair. "Did Marcus leave this here?" he asked casually. "Yeah," I answered quickly, my heart pounding. "He must have forgotten it after dinner." Mike raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. Still, the moment left me shaking. How much longer before he started asking more questions? The answer came sooner than I expected. It was a Sunday afternoon, and the house was filled with its usual noise. Eric and Marcus laughing in the backyard, Mike flipping through TV channels, and me pretending everything was fine as I set the table for dinner. But nothing was fine. I had crossed a line I could never undo, and the weight of my secret was beginning to crush me. Every time I looked at Mike, guilt twisted in my stomach like a knife. Every time I saw Eric, I felt like the worst mother in the world. Through the kitchen window, Marcus shot me a small, knowing smile. My heart pounded, and I quickly looked away. I had to end this. I had to stop before everything fell apart. But fate had other plans. It happened. That night, Mike had stepped outside to take a call, and Eric was upstairs showering after their swim. Marcus and I were alone in the kitchen, the tension between us thick enough to cut with a knife. "I can't do this anymore," I whispered, my voice trembling. He stepped closer, his hand brushing against mine. "You don't mean that." "I do," I insisted, though my resolve wavered as he looked at me. "This is wrong, Marcus. It has to stop." Before he could respond, the back door opened and Mike walked in. For a moment, we thought we had managed to compose ourselves, but then his eyes narrowed, flicking between Marcus and me. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone sharp. "Nothing," I said quickly, my voice too high-pitched to be convincing. Mike's gaze lingered on me before shifting to Marcus. "Friend or not, you'd better explain yourself, kid." Marcus hesitated, but before he could speak, Eric appeared in the doorway, his hair still damp from the shower. "What's going on?" he asked, looking between us. The silence stretched, heavy and oppressive. And then, to my horror, Mike turned to Eric. "Son, how well do you really know your friend?" "Dad, what are you talking about?" Eric asked, frowning. Mike didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of suspicion and betrayal. "Amanda, is there something you want to tell me?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. The truth was clawing its way to the surface, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. It was Marcus who finally broke the silence. "Mr. Blake, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Don't lie to me," Mike roared, slamming his hand down on the counter. The room erupted into chaos. Eric demanded answers, Marcus tried to explain, and Mike turned his fury on me. By the time the dust settled, the truth was out. Eric stormed out of the house, his face a mask of disbelief and anger. Marcus left shortly after, his usual confidence replaced by a look of shame. Mike and I were left alone in the kitchen, the silence between us deafening. "How long?" he finally asked, his voice hollow. I couldn't meet his eyes. "A few weeks," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He laughed bitterly, running a hand through his hair. "A few weeks? With our son's best friend? God, Amanda, what were you thinking?" "I wasn't," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I was lonely, Mike. You've been so distant, and I—" "Don't you dare blame this on me," he snapped, his voice razor sharp. "You made this choice, not me." He stormed out, leaving me alone with my guilt and regret. The aftermath was a nightmare. Eric refused to speak to me, and Mike moved into the guest room. The house felt like a war zone, every interaction charged with anger and hurt. Marcus stopped coming around, and I couldn't blame him. His friendship with Eric was over, and any chance of repairing my family seemed impossible. I spent my days trying to piece my life back together, but the damage was done. Trust once broken is nearly impossible to rebuild. Months later, I'm still living with the consequences of my actions. Mike and I are in therapy, though it's unclear if our marriage will survive. Eric has started to forgive me, but our relationship will never be the same. As for Marcus, he has moved on. I saw him once at a coffee shop, and we exchanged a brief, tense glance before he turned and walked away. I learned a hard lesson. A moment of weakness can destroy a lifetime of trust. Life is full of choices, and some can change everything in an instant. If you want more gripping, emotional stories like this one, don't forget to like and subscribe. There's always another tale waiting to be told.